sitting at home, no air conditioning, because I had to move the air conditioning because they're putting in an egress window. And just to the air conditioning, how that. Oh, really? But I heard, yeah, sometimes. Yeah, really, they got better roofs. Yeah, there's the whole, that's where the air conditioner used to be.
Hey Terry, we haven't turned on our air. Hey Rick.
This is river and no. Digging in the biggest dirt pile she's ever seen. She had so much fun. She's like digging through all that. Oh, yes. Yeah, the biggest dirt pile she'll ever have. Oh, yeah, yeah, she is just digging. Yeah. Nope, didn't have to. I just point at it, and she thinks there's something there, so she starts digging. Yeah. She is. So, hopefully we get it cut. Well, thank you. Stay the hottest day. It's,
You look pretty good for 83. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Hey Jesse, is anybody coming down the hallway?
No.
No, sir.
All right. Well, we could probably get started with our class now. Hey Wayne, would you mind leading us in an opening prayer?
Dear Father, we thank you so much for giving us this day. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to come together and study your word, Father, and praise you in song, and draw closer to you and be in fellowship with other Christians, Father. And we just thank you for all the blessings you give us. You take care of all of our daily needs, Father. And help us to focus on what your will is, and to do that in our lives. And we thank you so much for sending your Son, so we can look forward to being in heaven with you. We pray all this through your precious Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, before we get started, Robert, did you have some words of wisdom for us today?
Our weather's getting hotter now,
Yeah?
so 3 pig jokes. What did the pig say when he was out in the hot sun?
I don't know.
I'm bacon. Never play basketball with a pig.
Why?
They're ball hogs. Never trust a pig. They'll always squeal on you.
Oh, man, those are good. Thank you, Bob. All right, we were started in chapter 20 last week, and we got just through the first 3 verses. And just a reminder too, in chapter 19 that we just finished up, a couple things. This chapter 19 and 20 is kind of like a turning point in the entire book of Revelation, where a lot of things come to light. It helps explain a lot of things that maybe had a little bit of mystery to them in our understanding. Because we can clearly see in chapter 19, there is a judgment of the great prostitute, which is the false prophet, or Babylon mystery. It has, some of these characters have several names. But in the very end of chapter 19, beginning in verse 19, it talks about how the beast and the false prophet were both, the two of them, in verse 20 says, "Were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur," which is clearly identified as hell, and they were thrown in there. So the beast, we've always recognized from the beginning, is Satan, but in the beast form, he was also a seven-headed dragon. Those seven heads were symbolic of human governments that were corrupt and evil, and those are kind of like the minions of Satan himself to do his dirty deeds for him. But it says the beast, who is Satan, and the false governments, and the false prophet were all thrown into hell, which at that point, you're talking the end of time. That's the second coming, when that event happens. Then we start chapter 20, something kind of puzzling happens. It makes you rethink things a little bit if you're not used to studying the book of Revelation. And I'm going to read verses 1 through 3 one more time, and then we'll discuss it. Verse 1 reads, "And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore, till the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be set free for a short time." So the question you must initially ask, if you're paying attention when you read this, okay, the beast was thrown, which is Satan, into the hell itself in chapter 19, and all of a sudden we see him here being grabbed by an angel, and he was cast into the abyss, and the abyss is not hell. It's a different place, and the Bible makes it clear that the abyss and hell are different places. So the question needs to be asked then, if Satan was thrown into hell, how did he get out? Because in chapter 20, he's out. And he's seized by an angel and cast into the abyss. So the fact that he's out tells you this is a transition point in our understanding as far as how we interpret this particular book, because it clearly shows you that between 19 and 20, you can see that it's not sequential historically, because that is one of the schools of interpretation says each of the books or chapters in Revelation, each is a sequence throughout history. Like Napoleon did this, and that was this event in this chapter, or the Pope did this, or this was Martin Luther, or just throughout history they have the historical viewpoint, picks out these events and says this is what happened along the line. Well, this clearly tells you it can't be sequential historically when you see these two chapters, because Satan is clearly out of there, and it clearly points to, instead of sequential, it's putting us on a repeated recapitulation of various events that happened between the two advents of Christ. So recapitulation means it's a repeat of a judgment that God is making forth from a slightly different viewpoint. Each of the visions has a slightly different theme, teaching you about different things that happen throughout the history of the world, how God judges this one and judges that one and judges this one, and all these events are going on simultaneously throughout Revelation, but each chapter or each vision gives you a different viewpoint of certain things. And chapter 19 shows how the beast in government form, which is still Satan, is judged along with the false prophet. Chapter 20 talks about the personal judgment of Satan himself. And you can see that especially in the first 3 verses, where he is cast into the abyss, which, like I said before, is not hell. It also destroys the preterist, I think, interpretation, because they think everything happened in the first century in the book of Revelation. And the millennialism, we talked about a little bit about that. We'll get into that more. Philip.
Kind of easy way to look at it or to understand it is, that old saying or old thought about 4 blind men giving their view of the elephant. What the elephant looks like.
Yeah.
One is at the front, one is at the side, one is
Yeah.
on each side, one is at the back,
Yeah.
or three of them. And each one is telling you what the elephant looks like,
Mm-hmm.
but from their point of view.
Yes.
So it's chapter 19, chapter 20, and most of these signs are really different viewpoints of the same thing.
Exactly.
So it's looking from a different perspective. So
Right.
here's one perspective. And the thought is that the overall thing or reason is to get us to understand and come to one point.
Right. Right.
That God is in control. God controls all things, and all things must work the way God wants it to work out.
Right. And I think that's probably the one of the most important themes is, like you said at the very end there, that God is victor in the end of all this. So we don't need to be overly discouraged. And it seems like every chapter also has an encouraging remark too, to give us courage as Christians to realize that God truly is in control. Now, also too, I wanted to mention, I just want to do a slight review of what we read in verses 1 through 3 in chapter 20. First off, we talked about the abyss. It was mentioned last week, I think, Romans 10:7. Somebody mentioned that the word abyss was there too, and it was used in a different concept, referring to it as hell. But in that particular context, hell is kind of like Hades in that sense, and it's used in a metaphorical sense, not in in the sense that it's used in chapter 20 as a real place. Because you can see in Revelation 9, Revelation 20, and in Luke 8, it tells you very clearly that the abyss is a real place. And the only individuals that are put into the abyss is evil angels and the devil. Human beings are never mentioned as going into the abyss. They go into the fiery lake, but they do not go into the abyss. That is a place where Satan was sent. And it's used to explain in context, if we look at it, as the abyss means a dark pit or a bottomless pit, like the abyss of the ocean. You can look at it, the abyss could be the abyss of time, the abyss of despair, or the abyss of the underworld. It's used metaphorically in a lot of different places. We can even see certain words sometimes are used this way too. And you can, an example might be if you use the word station. The word station can sometimes mean a stopping place that you regularly go to. It can be a bus depot, it can be a work zone, or it could be a radio frequency. So a lot of words are used in different senses and different contexts to mean different things metaphorically. And Romans 7 is definitely used in a metaphorical sense in a way to describe hell itself, but it's not specifically referring to hell in that sense, other than that particular sense. So, the abyss seems to be very much a real place in Revelation. Also, the 1,000-year binding of Satan is like most time references in Revelation and in Daniel, and that was mentioned last week. Both of those time references are always mentioned between the two advents of Christ. And what are some of the terms God uses to describe time in Daniel and in Revelation? When he gives you a time frame for something, what are some of the terms he used? It was mentioned last week. I don't know if you remember or not.
Yeah.
That's why we're here, we remind.
It's, complete months and years, like 7 years, 3.5 years, it's, like 1,400 months or something like that.
It was, it was 3.5 months, and it was 1,260 days, which is 3.5 months.
No,
I'm sorry,
3.5 years.
yeah, years, and then 42 months is also 3.5 years too. So all these time references are exactly the same time frame, but you can tell they're used in a symbolic matter. And when you look at the book of Revelation chapter 20, almost everything in the entire chapter is symbolic of something else. And the people who try to say that this 1,000-year reign that it talks about in chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, is literal. Now, how in the world can you get something literal out of a chapter that everything is symbolic? You got to have some evidence to support the claim that it's literal in a chapter that everything is symbolic. And it's only mentioned one time in the Bible, and it's mentioned here, so you have no other references throughout the Bible to give as evidence to say that this can mean something else, other than a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord, and that doesn't help you at all. That's a very different sense. So almost all references, so the 1,000 years is not literal. It's the same time frame as the 3.5 years, time times a time and a half a time, the 42 months, and 1,260 days. So they're all the same thing. They're all symbolic time frames, and it's normal for God to not tell us exactly how long things are going to be, because remember the first question Jesus' disciples gave him in Acts chapter 1, it says, Lord, are you now going to restore the kingdom at this time? And what does he say to them? What did Jesus say to his disciples when they wanted to know the time? It's not for you to know what the Father's will is in these areas. So God has never intended to give us literal time frames for stuff like this, especially when it comes to prophetic teachings. Also, God has given Christians weapons to powerfully defend themselves from Satan, as mentioned in Ephesians 6 when we talked about the armor of God, and that's in connection with the fact that the binding of Satan in the abyss is symbolic of what? Is it really talking about throwing Satan into the abyss? It is a literal place, but what's the point of all this? What's the symbolic meaning that God is doing to Satan?
It sounds like just a metaphor for the control that he has
Yes,
over Satan, the limiting control
correct.
that he has.
And God has done wonderful things for us as believers in Christ, that he's given us these weapons to defend ourselves against Satan. In Ephesians 6, as I mentioned, the armor of God gives a great list of weapons we have to use against Satan. God has also protected his words powerfully, the scriptures, over the centuries. Satan has tried to destroy it many times over, but he's been very unsuccessful in that effort. So God has limited Satan, and that's what the abyss is all about. He's limiting Satan and what he can do to destroy the world, and we have weapons to help us in that. So the ending of Vision 6 clearly depicts the end of time in hell. In Revelation 19, Jesus personally ends the beast and the false prophet. Now in chapter 20, his vision, beginning of Vision 7, the final vision clearly shows a recapitulation of history from the binding and then destroying of Satan in hell personally. So in chapter 19, you can see Satan's embodied emissaries in human form as part of the beast. These were the godless governments, and they were also thrown into hell along with the false prophet, which is false religions, and they were sent to hell in Vision 6 in chapter 19. That's kind of a recap of the things we talked about in verses 1 through 3. Before we move on now to the rest of the chapter, any questions on that? Because if you're not clear about something, please ask, because
Could you just repeat the first sentence of what you just said? It's a recapitulation of the binding of Satan and,
from Vision 7 in verse 20 clearly shows a recapitulation of history from a binding of Satan himself and then destroying Satan in hell personally. Is that what you wanted?
yep.
Okay.
Jeff, I don't know if you could make this jump, but
Don't go
One
too
thing
far
that is-
ahead of me now.
the one thing that's interesting with, because it talks about the power of Satan is to deceive is no longer going to be there. And you think about what happened about at this time is when the Bible really, the whole New Testament was pretty much written in a short period of time.
Mhm.
If you think about that, kind of makes sense that kind of eliminated deception of the devil because kind of locked in the plan of salvation and how it
Yep.
works.
Yeah, you can see,
I don't know if you can make that jump or not, but it is interesting about that time is when,
yeah,
because Christ's words were spoken here on earth, they were written down.
Yep.
And they were taken
and last week I also mentioned all the things God has done historically to prepare the way for the coming of his Son to be especially fruitful in his efforts to preach to all the world, of the Roman roads, the Greek language. Just so many different things historically were set in place to make way for his word. I was listening to a teaching the other day where they were talking about, and I had never thought of this before, but it's true, in that the thing that brought the power of the Catholic Church down was the Gutenberg press. Because they were able then to put the Bible in mass production so everybody could see it and put it in their own native languages, where before nobody was allowed to have it. It was always in Latin, and they were able to control the masses that way. The same thing is done with Islam throughout the world too. The internet is really causing havoc in the Muslim religion, because now they can get online and see what really everything is all about, and it could end up being the destruction of Islam too, in many sense, because information is power, and God has ways of releasing information at key times throughout history to defeat evil empires, so to speak, in various ways.
And you see how confused, I mean, even the disciples were confused about what was really happening based on just the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Because it does say here that you no longer be able to deceive nations. We know there's still false teachers out there, there's a lot of stuff like
Yep.
that. So that can't be what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
It's gotta be something different. So.
And that's one of the things Satan was limited from, is from deceiving the nations like he could before in the Old Testament. And we're gonna see too, when Satan finally gets released, what's the first thing he goes after? The nations. And you can see that later on down in the chapter. So let's begin reading in verse 4. And before I do that, how many of you actually read your homework assignment? Romans 6. Well, okay, maybe have to read it again. All right, so let's begin in Revelation 20, verse 4. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection, and the second death has no power over them, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. This whole section here is the heart of where millennialists get their teachings, and I am going to attempt to dispute all of that here as we go through. And I'm going to use as a commentary the Bible, because I think that's the best way to refute it. First off, verse 4. John sees thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge. Some of your versions will read a little bit differently as far as that one. Some will say judgment was given unto them. Or this one's, my version, in the NIV says authority to judge. Now, one makes it sound like the righteous were judged, and the other one sounds like the righteous is doing the judging. In a sense, I think it's both the same thing. You can look at it from two different perspectives and come with the same conclusion. First off, who does the Bible say has the authority to do the final judgment of mankind? Okay, we have God and we have Christ. Which one is it?
It's Christ.
Okay? You're both right. It's both. God is the ultimate judge, but Christ is the one, it seems like he's going to be the one personally sitting on the throne when this happens, because if you look over, I think it was in Matthew 25, it talks about that Christ was given authority to judge at the final judgment. So you could look at this two ways. There's also another way to look at this. Also, too, the Bible does say that we will judge angels. And it also said we will judge the 12 tribes of Israel. That's saying believers are going to be doing that. Well, wait, I thought God and Christ was doing that. How can we be judges and Christ is the judge? Which is it? Is that a contradiction?
I think it's obviously Christ is allowed to judge because he went through the same life that the people he's judging. So he has the ability to judge because he lived that life.
True.
And I think that parallels to why Christians are considered judges, because they were able to live that life or at least rely on the plan of salvation. Therefore, they're not physically judging, but because of they were able to do it, because they're able to do it, that judges people that didn't do it. And I think the same thing with Christ is, Christ did it. He came and lived on earth and lived the life that he was supposed to.
Yeah.
Therefore, he has the right to judge.
Yeah, you're on the right track, and also too, in our, Declaration of Independence, what's the first words on that statement?
We the people.
We the people. Who is the government of the United States in reality? We the people. The same thing is true in a certain sense in Christianity. Christ is the judge. He is the ultimate judge. But at the same time, like if we have a courtroom situation and a judge sets forth a verdict in a trial and he says, this is the law, this is what we need to do to satisfy the justice that the law requires. And when a judge gives a decision like that, what do we, the people, do then? Do we fight it or do we support it? We support it because that's our government and we are part of the government and we support the decisions of our government. Same thing is true in Christianity. So in a sense, we as American people are judges in trials because we support the judge. We support the government. We are part of the whole system, just like in Christianity. Christians are part of the whole system God has set up to judge the world. And in a sense, when God or Christ makes a judgment, we are also partakers of that judgment. That's why he says we judge the 12 tribes and we judge the angels, because we agree with all the decisions of the judge.
Verse 6 clearly explains all of that. Let's start, and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection, and was such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years.
It does.
So if you're doing God's will, and the second death has no power over you, you're part of
Mhm.
Christ. The member of the church is his body. And if we are part of him, then his judgment is us judging also. His judging is us also judging. That's what he said in chapter 2 and verse 10, right? When he said, if you overcome, you can come over and reign with me eternally. So we become his priests and his king.
Right.
And we share in his priesthood and we share in his kingship. That's why we are royal priesthood.
Now, does everybody understand that, though?
No,
From all
no,
different
that's the
groups?
thing.
No, they don't.
They don't. Just backing up, you're talking about the reason why Christ has the power to judge. God, what makes God holy and righteous, and his judgments holy and righteous, is not just because he is God, but what God has done is shown us through Christ that he is holy and righteous. You see, if Christ had not come, we could always complain that God is just, being, just because he's God, then, he's being hard on us. But God became man and lived just like man and obeyed God's command. Therefore, he is righteous in being able to judge us because he, God, became man and lived how he wanted to live, just the way he wanted man to live.
Good. Also, too, just making sure we use the Bible as a commentary. Revelation chapter 1 talks about in the first 6 verses where John is seeing heaven itself, and then he reads in verse 6, he has made us, that's the believers, to be, and some don't even have in Greek the to be, but he has made us a kingdom and priests. And see, a lot of people who don't understand the scriptures think only the priests, they think of the Jewish priesthood or they think of the Catholic priesthood. Who are the priests of God in the New Testament? It's all Christians. A lot of people really struggle with that understanding. I'm not quite sure why they do, because it's really laid out pretty plainly everywhere you look. It says it over and over and over again. So that's an important point to be made here in all this. When you begin to read through this too, that he talks about the martyrs, those who have been beheaded for the cause of Christ, and those who had not worshipped the beast and his image, and not received the mark on their foreheads or heads, and we've talked about it. And then in that verse he says, they came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Millennialists will say, when Christ comes back, he's going to raise all kinds of people, and they're going to live for a literal 1,000 time period. Human beings are going to live for 1,000 years, literally. That's what they say it means. Is that what it means? What is this 1,000 years that believers seem to be able to live? Notice he says the rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were ended. He says this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them. So the question remains here is the resurrection, the first resurrection, is it spiritual or is it literal? Millennials will say it's literal. Is it? What's the first resurrection he's talking about here in chapter 20? Where'd you get that from, Wayne?
Probably Romans 6, my
Okay. Well, let's go to Romans 6. That, like I said, that was part of our homework assignment because it kind of lays it out for us, and this isn't the only place it talks about it. Romans 6, extremely important. Not only we use these verses to emphasize the absolute essentiality of baptism because its symbolism is beyond compare. I mean, how can you miss the importance of baptism and not see the symbolism that it emphasizes here? Chapter 6 of Romans, I'm going to begin in verse 3. He says, or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ were baptized into his what? Death. We were therefore buried with him, just like a death, with him through baptism into death. Baptism is symbolic of death. In order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may have a new life. So we're raised from the dead. If we have been united with him like this in his death, we will certainly also be united with him in his what? Resurrection. For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin, because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. Now we have died with Christ, we believe also that we will live with him. So when we die, what is he referring to? Is that physical or spiritual, the death and baptism? It's a spiritual, symbolic death, symbolic of what Jesus did, and that was, he did a literal death, and he was resurrected from the grave, and it says, and brought back to life, just like baptism symbolizes that entire process of salvation that God has set up, and his plan depicts all these things, showing how we too can be resurrected to life again. But is it literal or spiritual life he's talking about? It's a spiritual life, because we don't literally die in the act of baptism, except in the sense that our old self dies, not our physical body. So when we look at these verses too, when he talks about, here's where you gotta use some common sense here a little bit. So if the first resurrection is our baptism and coming to Christ, what does it mean that we will reign with Christ 1,000 years? How do you put those two together? I'm gonna give you a clue. Think of the gospel age. What has been going on for the entire gospel age when it comes to people coming to Christ? A lot of people have came to Christ between the two comings of Christ.
So, 10, you have to remember again now, in America, the way the Jews had this thing about number, 7, 3, 4, 6, 10. 10 means completion. Multiple of 10 is also completion.
Mhm.
Anytime there's a multiple of 10, it is completion it's talking about. So it's a complete period. So between Jesus' first coming, or his death and resurrection, and his second coming, it's a complete period again, at 1,000 years.
Okay.
100,000 years.
Right.
Anything multiple of 10 is completion,
So this is symbolic then.
symbolic of a complete
So-
period.
There's people who partake of the first resurrection over the 1,000-year time frame, which is symbolic also. So, do Christians live for 1,000 years? No. So, what is the point he's trying to show here? Is that Christians throughout the whole gospel age come to Christ, they're resurrected spiritually for 1,000 years. In other words, through the gospel ages. It doesn't necessarily mean we literally live for 1,000 years, but we live over the 1,000-year time frame. And there's thousands and millions of people that have come to live with that, with the blessings of Christ over that time frame. It's not referring to how long our lifespan is. It's the spiritual age that he's talking about.
Going along with what Philip said, because you brought this up last week, the 10 is the perfect number related to this earthly realm,
Mhm.
and 7 is the perfect number related to the spiritual realm. This is talking about the earthly realm because it's talking about the church that's on earth. I think if he was gonna talk about the church beyond earth, he would have used 7 times 7 times 7, which I'm not sure what that is. But I think there is a reason to use 10 versus 7.
Yeah. Now, also too, I want to throw this in here too, because I think this actually helps explain a little bit too. It says, they come to life, the believers do, but the rest did not, until the time of the judgment he's referring to here. And the rest is those who died outside of Christ. So when it talks about the they in there, it's talking about the fact that there's, or the rest of the dead did not come to life in verse 5 till the 1,000 years were ended. That's referring to when the judgment day comes, those who died outside of Christ will be brought forth in front of God for the judgment, and then they partake of the second death. Believers don't partake of the second death. Who partakes of the second death? Unbelievers. What is the second death then? It's judgment, and it's the casting into hell. Believers are not affected by the second death, because the second death is being cast into hell. You don't want to be a part of the second death. The first resurrection preserves you from the second death. You only die once physically.
You know, talking about the second death or the judgment, this is just my personal view, I can't really back it up. But there's no time other than earth. Once earth ends, in my view, in my mind, I think as soon as you die, you're gonna be judged. Because there's no time. So you're gonna, if you think about that, that kind of makes it more sober versus a lot of people think of death and you're gonna hang out somewhere for a while.
Well, there's actually a verse we're gonna look at, and I sometimes wonder about that myself, because I'm not quite sure myself whether what you're
Again,
saying.
I can't prove that from the Bible. but I think it's-
I'm not sure either, but there's another,
It definitely
section.
gets people's attention.
It does. And when we look at that other verse, we're gonna look at the rich man and Lazarus, that story, where there's an interesting, dialogue there that kind of makes us wonder about certain things too, because I can eventually get into some of the definitions of some of these terms that deal with the afterlife. So is there any questions now what the first resurrection is? That's when you come to Christ and you're reborn spiritually. You have a physical death, but we don't partake of the second death, because the second death is only for those who are wicked, and they've died once, and then they're gonna die again in hell. And we're gonna have to talk about what that means too, because that could get complicated too. That's kind of a depressing subject, but I think we have to look at it a little bit. And the priests of God thing is pretty clear too. So, it totally makes the millennial thought think, do you guys read the Bible? I mean, it just makes you really wonder. I mean, the Bible explains itself in so many different places, and to yank it out of context and say he's talking literally when it's clearly symbolic is just a gross misuse of scriptures in the way they do, and it's kind of sad when you see them do it that way. So, before we move on, any questions before we go any further? All right. Let's begin in verse 7. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. You stated that already, so he's restating it again. In other words, he'll be released from where? The abyss, which is symbolic of his limitations as far as the mischief he can cause. And verse 8 tells you what he's going to do. He will go out after he's released and deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. So Satan's first thing he's going to do when he gets out of the abyss prison, he's going to go out and do what? Deceive the nations again and have the same kind of authority and power that he had back in the Old Testament. The only example I can think of that is, remember back in the book of Daniel, I think it's chapter 8, where Gabriel was doing battle with some demon princes who were arguing over certain nations, Greece and another nation. And it took Michael to come in to clarify the situation. You could see the battle going on between nations at that point. So he's going to go out into the nations to deceive the world. Gog and Magog is a reference back to, we talked about this earlier, the Gog and Magog is very similar to the Battle of Armageddon. Same thing. It's the same reference to the same place. And what are they going to do? They're going to march out to where? The four corners of the earth, or the breadth of the earth later on when they get in verse 9. He says he's going to gather them for battle like the sand on the seashore. Verse 9, they march across the breadth of the earth, surround the camp of God's people, the city he loves, but he came down from heaven and devoured them. So Satan's going to go out into the world to do battle. This is called Armageddon. This is called the battle with Gog and Magog. Is it in Jerusalem, in Israel, this battle? What does the scripture say? Where's the battle going to be held?
Broad plain of earth.
Four corners, or like across the four corners.
In other words, the whole earth. Why would Satan just do battle in Israel or Jerusalem? Like I said before, there's hardly any Christians in Israel now as it is. There's not very many of them. Where are all the Christians? They're scattered throughout the world. What does Satan want to do to destroy Christianity? He has to go across the entire world to do battle with the whole world. So if he's going out in the breadth of the world with all his armies, then he says they're going to attack the camp of God's people, the city he loves. Who's that? Who's the camp of God in the city he loves? It's the church. Believers. So, and then fire comes down from heaven and devours them. And verse 10, the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet, remember back in 19, have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So when Satan does battle with the world, when he goes out after he's released, he's going to try to destroy the entire church. Satan must know this is his last hurrah. And when he does it, how long does the battle last? It doesn't appear to be very long.
I still think, you're probably gonna get to this, but this is symbolic, and I think the one reason you know it's symbolic is because it says their numbers like the sand of the sea. This is just saying that everybody that hasn't followed God is gonna be in the same army as Satan.
Mhm.
and ultimately all of them are going to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just gathering all together.
And Jesus kind of,
Metaphorically and spiritually.
Yes.
They're all coming together in one.
yeah, and their numbers is about the sand on the seashore too. Remember when Jesus was preaching the Sermon on the Mount? What did he say the percentage of believers in the world was versus the percentage of the wicked in the world was? How many were going to be true believers? It's also talked about throughout the whole Bible. They're called the remnant of God. How many people are the remnant or the believers of God? If you look at stark percentages in the world, Jesus used the word few. How many is a few? Is it 50%? 30%? I mean, when you talk, a lot of times when you talk about the remnant, a lot of people say it's 10%. Now, that's not a literal number, but the fact is, few is, the vast majority of the world is not gonna make it to heaven. Only few stay on the narrow pathway. Most go to the broad road. So even Jesus, when it's sand on the seashore, they are vast in number compared to the believers. There's a lot more of them than there is of us, but it doesn't really matter when God enters the picture, because they will certainly be defeated. We'll stop here. Any final questions or thoughts?
Talk about Gog and Magog. People who are reading this would have understood. Go back to Ezekiel chapter 38, 39.
Yes,
Talk about Gog,
yeah,
the prince of Gog, and what happened to Gog and Magog.
yep,
God destroyed them. So
yep,
they understood that God was saying, just as though I destroyed Gog and Magog.
yeah.
Same
He,
thing here.
he repeats himself throughout the entire Bible, time and time again, through all these judgments. They're all symbolic of the very end time. So that, like you said, the people who lived in those times understand these illustrations and analogies very well. We have to study it a little bit more than they did, because we didn't live through it like they
Says
did.
there's a stairway to heaven and a road to hell, so right there it tells you. A different number of people going.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Lord willing, see you next week.
Yep, I liked your 10% for a few.
Yes. Yeah? It
Not
is.
saying it's percentage, but it's
And
a
like,
complete
what,
number.
how much are we supposed to give?
10%. The one thing I thought of when you gave that example, and you talked about the judging something. In our court system, most criminals, or whatever you want to call them, that's facing a judge, they don't want to face a judge because he knows the law. Most of them want a jury trial. So as a juror, you're looking at the facts. You're going to make, even if the judge thinks you're wrong, he can't override you, the jury. And to me, because I was on a murder trial that should have been a 3-hour trial, shot the guy in the back, through a door, turned him over, and emptied a gun in his chest. First time we voted was 2 not guilty. But what I'm saying is the defense was like Satan, deceiving the facts, twisting it around. And you sat there, and I could understand. And I thought, when I come home, my wife said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We got to go back." There was 2, and then the one, it was a young black girl. It was and the other was a white lady, real old. And finally, we voted one not guilty. And we're like, the jury was like, "I don't know where to go. We don't want to put pressure on the person, but we need to understand." And he was really good because you just vote. I mean, volunteer. You don't understand your point. Maybe we're missing something. Finally, this lady must have been 68 years old. She had a cross on. She was always real nervous. She raised her hand. I said, "Okay, why?" "Well, I had an uncle that was the nicest man, but he was an alcoholic, and he got in some trouble. Nothing like this, but I really feel this man would have never done it if he wasn't drinking." And the guy was like, "Well, I agree with you 100%. Just a minute." He walked and knocked on. He went and talked to the judge. He come back. "Let me read the law. If you're under the influence of drugs, alcohol, whatever, you're still responsible for your action. Okay, let's revolt. But I'm just saying, I can understand when you go on a trial